The Trump administration is facing some very real problems right now. That includes illegal rejection. This has been late-breaking news. The Trump DOJ has failed in what was a do-over of another failure. You may recall all of these cases they've brought against perceived opponents, their so-called enemies list. Well, what you see is several of those were dismissed, and the update is tonight we have the news. They have failed to re-indict the New York Attorney General, Letitia James. A judge had dismissed the original charges. That was within the last 2 weeks. So that's a huge rebuke. It shows they keep legally falling on their face. I'm going to get to that. So if you're interested in how that happened, what it means, how many of these cases are doomed, stay with us. We begin with an even larger story by any estimation because it involves allegations of war crimes by the Trump administration, shifting narratives about the timeline, real questions from both parties, Republicans joining in the demand for answers on Capitol Hill, shifting responses from the administration have added confusion and concern to what we already know was a problem, a deadly boat strike that legal experts and veterans and military experts have said, based on what we know, amounts to a war crime. Now, usually you can't say that so quickly, but because of the nature of the multiple strikes and the clear evidence not really disputed that survivors were killed in a follow-up strike, that looks like a violation of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, a war crime. Who would be responsible and whether there will be accountability are the big open questions roiling Washington. Admiral Frank Mitch Bradley was the commander in charge, reporting, of course, up to the defense secretary appointed by Donald Trump. He was on Capitol Hill to brief lawmakers today. If that seems like a faster reaction and transparency than we sometimes see, that's because it is. An administration that has withheld all sorts of things, I'm not going to list them all right now, did not try to prevent him from going in there and testifying, essentially, providing testimony and information to lawmakers. They want to know about the second strike, which killed, as I mentioned, the 2 survivors of the first strike from the U.S. This has become a scandal, starting with Washington Post investigative journalism. Credit to the reporters who are still working across all of these stories in a difficult environment where the administration, including at the Pentagon, has tried to quash exactly this kind of reporting. Now, the Post's initial report had many details that have remained corroborated, some that are widely contested, including the report that Hegseth gave a verbal command to kill everybody. Bradley stated today to lawmakers that there was no actually such an order to kill all. Video of the second strike has not become public. A Democratic congressman who saw it today, however, which is part of the transparency and oversight process, somebody sees it and can give a readout to the public. Here's what they said.
What I saw in that room was one of the most troubling things I've seen in my time in public service. Under the DoD manual for abiding by the laws of armed conflict, the specific example given of an impermissible action is attacking a shipwreck. Any American who sees the video that I saw will see the United States military attacking shipwrecked sailors.
That's the account. The video of the first strike is public, but not what was just referred to by that congressman there, Himes, the second strike. A Republican senator said Admiral Bradley testified that the strikes were minutes apart. If that is an accurate summary of the testimony, it would differ from what Hegseth claimed, that he watched the first strike and not the second, which, again, we'll play it for you, but it had sounded like, and senators have spoken on this, that Hegseth was implying it was a much greater amount of time, potentially over an hour. Here is some of the new exchange.
Senator, how far apart were those strikes on September 2nd?
I mean, they're several minutes apart. You had obscurance, both the smoke from the first strike and then cloud cover as well. I couldn't tell you exactly how long.
But minutes,
they weren't.
Minute.
I think minutes.
I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours.
Mr. Secretary, on the second strike, you said it happened more than an hour after the first. Did I hear it correctly?
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of time.
Minutes, or you went off the room, is what you're saying.
I already stated my answer quite clearly.
That would sound like a discrepancy, and his reticence to speak more about it. I've stated my answer. Well, no, the follow-up question is about what your answer is. Sounds like someone who is either on the defense, evasive, or has already lawyered up and is trying to avoid committing to one timeline. The Pentagon is facing demands to release the entire unedited video. There are, of course, times where secrecy is understandable in military or war operations, but remember, there's no declared war. There's no foreign army here. These are boats that are alleged to be doing international illegal activity, and it's not clear why, according to the Trump administration, you could release part of the first video of the operation, but not the very controversial alleged war crime part 2. There's a real-time written text system that military officials have used. The New York Times reporting on this during planning scenarios ahead of the attack and the operation. Again, all of the records and the way the military operates, plus the surveillance, if you had it all, would seem to provide more clarity about what is now a conflicting story. There are big questions about what the rules of engagement were provided, whether there was that kill-all order. The Times reports that officials say the plan to deal with survivors would be to attempt to rescue survivors who were helpless, shipwrecked, and out of what the administration considered a fight. The military would try again to kill them if they took what the U.S. deemed to be hostile action, like communicating with suspected cartel members. We have heard from a lot of military experts that this is exactly why you don't typically send the military to do warlike operations in peacetime or for law enforcement. As bad as communicating with other drug cartels may be, it is not clear how you square that with the UCMJ, what we have heard from experts, what I've reported for you and reminded everyone legally, which is if they are survivors, you are not allowed to go execute them. This goes all the way back to Nuremberg and the United Nations founding and human rights, the United Nations Declarations of Human Rights. And one of the things that, again, put aside partisanship, that has united the American experiment for a long time, that even with failures, we have this code, we apply it, and we don't go around doing terrorism, for example, where you target civilians, or war crimes, where people are defenseless and you just execute them. There is a whole body of law around prisoners of war as well. And as one expert reminded us on this program earlier this week, the United States has a vested interest in this because getting most countries to follow this means that our soldiers, of course, in the main, maybe not against ISIS or Al-Qaeda, but against other countries that abide by these rules, are also afforded some of this protection. Officials say the survivors were spotted radioing, meaning they may have been contacting others, and that is one of the reasons, or critics would say pretext, for the attack. But what were the survivors supposed to do if they are, again, shipwrecked in the middle of the ocean after taking on that attack? Here is a view from a longtime conservative outlet, you might remember all the way back from the days of Buckley, the National Review, discussing these obvious contradictions on the serious matter of what we, the United States, are. What do we do, and what do we allow our civilian control of the military, our politicians, to do in our name with this mighty military? Now, there is a watchdog at the Pentagon. They had that report on the same Pentagon chief, Hegseth's intelligence errors in Signalgate. That report is redacted partly, but we know it says that Hegseth, who made all these obvious mistakes, we know he violated policy because he wasn't using the official channels, but that in so doing, he put the lives of service members at risk, a potential compromise of sensitive information which could cause harm to DoD personnel and objectives. Now, that scandal, you might recall, went on for months of investigation. We are in the early days of this other one. And while the lives lost right now are not American, the Military Code of Justice cares about following the law and avoiding war crimes no matter who the victims are. And people have died.